you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Tuesday, February 10th, 2015, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thank you for joining us for this next 2 hours of news, interviews, views, information, music, comedy, and more by, for, and about the cannabis community. If you want to stay informed in this ever ongoing green rush, this is the place to be, Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific Time, live on 420radio.org. Shout out also to our podcast listeners out there. Thank you for making us so popular on iTunes. In the government and organizations category, we had 3 of the top 10 episodes last week. So this is the time to get involved with 420 Radio and the Russ Belville Show. If you're looking to advertise, get your brand or service in front of the highest quality audience in marijuana law reform and business, this is the place to do it. We are taking sponsors for our booth package, where you will get premier exposure at the High Times Cannabis Cups and all the other marijuana related business expos, fairs, festivals, and conferences that I'll be attending this year. Just follow up at 420radio.org/advertise if you'd like some more information on how you can become a booth sponsor for 420 Radio and the Russ Belville Show. All right, coming up on today's show, we have got all sorts of great information for you. Joining us today in our cannabis community chat at half past, we've got addiction expert and co-founder of the website thefix.com, Joe Schrank, will be joining us to talk about how there's a shift now in addiction treatment and drug prevention, and a lot of these prevention experts are beginning to favor the legalization of marijuana. We'll talk about that with Joe Schrank coming up at half past. Also on the show today, we will have time for a radical rant. We're going to talk about the myth of the Stoned Driving Menace. We've got that latest study from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and yet the Washington Post and USA Today still don't quite understand what that study is telling us, and it's something we've known here for years, and that is marijuana users are not an outward threat on the roads, not a risk of freeway mayhem, not likely to wreck into you. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show. But also on the show today, we will have time for our drug war data mining. And we're going to take a look at some of the stats that are coming out of Washington and Colorado with regard to the teen use of marijuana in post-legalization America. What do these stats mean, and what do they tell us about the future of America's youth and their healthy development in a world of legalized substances? We'll talk about that coming up in drug war data mining. In Behind the Headlines today, speaking of health, we're going to take a look at a story from Normal's Paul Armentano, posted up on Alternet, on the 5 pro-marijuana studies that the mainstream media are ignoring. But first, we'll start things off with the 420 Radio News. And in the headlines today, we've got Berkeley Patients Group still fighting against the U.S. attorneys in California, despite the Cole memo and the recent restriction on spending money to attack state legal medical marijuana. We've got lawmakers in Alaska grappling with how they're going to regulate newly legal marijuana in the Great White North. The Virginia General Assembly is timidly moving forward on CBD legislation. Medical marijuana is up for discussion in the state of Louisiana, and in Maine, a citizens group has filed a petition for the legalization of marijuana, the second group to do so following the Marijuana Policy Project. All of that coming up in Hour 1 of the Russ Belville Show, and then in Hour 2, we're going to talk about that new shift in paradigm in addiction understanding. We've got Electric Tuesday Tunes with Electric Bob, and I'll be delivering my presentation from the Cannabis Cup, How Not to Piss Off Your Cannabis Clientele. 2 jam-packed hours coming up next on the Russ Belville Show.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
420 Radio, your ticket to the High Times Cannabis Cups.
This is Radical Russ encouraging you to take a look at the Weed Blog every day. Johnny Green and the staff at the Weed Blog are on top of all the latest developments in the fight to end marijuana prohibition nationwide. You can even get the Weed Blog on your smartphone by installing the Weed Blog app for iPhone and Android. If it's about weed, it's on the Weed Blog, including my original writing. So don't delay. Read the Weed Blog today.
Fun.
Oh, hello. I'm Big Daddy, and I want you to join me at the Funky Roller Ring. We're partying hard over here, baby. So stop on by, check out the funky grooves, and shake your booty too.
Don't get in too deep, brother. Don't get in too heavy. Don't get so you can move about whenever you get ready.
Sir, do you think there will or should come a time for us to discuss the possibility of legalization, regulation, and control of all drugs, thereby doing away with the violent criminal market as well as a major source of funding for international terrorism? Thank you so much for your time, Mr. President.
Well, I think this is an entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Name the time and place, Mr. President. Radical Russ has been prepping for this debate full-time since 2005. The Russ Belville Show.
It's time for the 420 Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Transcripts of 420 Radio News are available daily on our website at 420radio.org. Now, here's Russ Belville with your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
This is your 420 Radio News for Tuesday, February 10th, 2015. Berkeley Patients Group notched another win against federal authorities in court Friday when a federal judge sided with the city of Berkeley in its efforts to keep the dispensary open. The dispensary will now remain open while the courts decide whether the city of Berkeley has the legal standing to defend the club in court against federal prosecutors. In May 2013, United States Attorney Melinda Hagg moved to seize the dispensary as part of a broad crackdown on state legal cannabis businesses. But the property owner and the city of Berkeley sued to block the forfeiture. The city argues that it would suffer irreparable harm if the case were allowed to proceed to conclusion without city participation. Berkeley Patient Group's leadership does not understand why U.S. Attorney Hogg is defying orders from the White House as well as congressional law, mandating she do something more useful with her time and resources. Alaska lawmakers are considering a bill in the Senate Judiciary Committee that would remove marijuana, hash, and hash oil from the state's controlled substance statutes. As of February 24th, adults 21 years and older will be able to possess up to an ounce of marijuana under a ballot issue passed in November. Lawmakers have been working on a bill that accomplishes that and also updates other related laws. Senator John Coghill, Republican of North Pole, said the newest bill allows adults to possess up to 4 ounces of marijuana. The initiative legalized possession of up to 1 ounce, but a previous court decision allowed possession at home of up to 4 ounces based on privacy rights. The draft also adds marijuana to language revolving around dependency. Nurses can lose their licenses for habitually abusing marijuana, and individuals can receive treatment for marijuana abuse. The state has 9 months from February 24th to write regulations for the retail and commercial aspects of the industry. The Virginia General Assembly has passed legislation to allow use of 2 derivatives of the marijuana plant for treating severe epilepsy. It's the first effective medical marijuana legislation to win approval in Virginia, according to its House sponsor, Delegate Dave Albo. The measure, unanimously passed by the House on Tuesday, allows possession of cannabidiol oil, or THCA oil, with written certification by a doctor that it is needed for treatment of intractable epilepsy. Lawmakers were moved by emotional testimony from parents of children with epilepsy who have suffered debilitating side effects from taking legal drugs. A similar bill was approved by the state Senate last week, 37-1. Albo said his bill originally would have covered marijuana used in treating cancer and glaucoma, but he encountered opposition from lawmakers concerned that the drug would be diverted for recreational use. Medical marijuana will be back on the table during the Louisiana legislature's spring lawmaking session. Representative Dalton Honor, a Democrat of Baton Rouge, has pre-filed a bill that would allow for marijuana to be dispensed and distributed for medical purposes. The legislature legalized marijuana for medical purposes in 1991, but the current law does not allow for the legal dispensing of the drug. Doctors can legally prescribe it, patients can legally use it, but there is no way to acquire it. Honor's bill would address the lack of a middleman. Last year, 79% of Louisiana residents participating in an LSU survey said they supported some marijuana legalization. Governor Bobby Jindal has also indicated he would back access to medical marijuana as long as it was tightly regulated. Last year's proposal was killed in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. The powerful Louisiana Sheriff's Association and Attorney General Buddy Caldwell opposed the legislation. A group pushing to legalize recreational marijuana in Maine has submitted a citizens' initiative to the Secretary of State to start the process of getting the issue on the November 2016 ballot. Legalize Maine, a political action committee formed last year, proposes to legalize and tax marijuana with an emphasis on supporting local agriculture. The Washington, D.C.-based Marijuana Policy Project also plans to gather signatures to get legalization on the ballot next year. Legalize Maine's plan would allow adults 21 and older to possess 2.5 ounces of marijuana outside of their homes, require that 40% of cultivation licenses go to small-scale farmers, and allow marijuana social clubs where people could buy and use the drug. It would also tax marijuana sales at 10%, a higher rate than the one that applies to prepared food, lodging, and liquor. To qualify for the ballot, Legalize Maine will need to collect 61,123 valid signatures. This has been your 420 Radio News for Tuesday, February 10th, 2015. I'm Russ Belville.
420 Radio, turning red states and blue states green.
The Green Cross has been an amazing source of cannabis medicines for my pain management. Whether I need edibles or tinctures or topicals, I'm able to combine the 2 or 3 to give me really successful pain control.
It's the delivery service that Green Cross provides is just incredible. You get your medicine and it's delivered by a person that you trust.
Whether we come to you or you come to us, the Green Cross delivers.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact NORML at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
The International Cannabis Business Conference is coming to the Hyatt Regency Hotel in San Francisco, California, February 15th and 16th, 2015. Don't miss this exclusive opportunity to hear from the experts on the future of marijuana commerce, including scientists like Dr. Carl Hart, Dr. Amanda Ryman, and Dr. Stanton Peel, policy experts like Ethan Nadelman from Drug Policy Alliance, Anthony Johnson from Oregon's Legalization Campaign, travel author Rick Steves from Washington's Legalization Campaign, and California legalization pioneer Dale Sky Jones. Business experts like Harborside Steve D'Angelo, ArcView Group's Troy Dayton, and UFCW union leader Dan Rush. Cannabis journalists like Ricardo Baca, Steve Bloom, and Doug Fine, and California Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, plus many, many more. Tickets are on sale now at internationalcbc.com, but hurry, last year's conference in Portland, Oregon was a sellout. International Cannabis Business Conference, San Francisco, California, February 15th and 16th, internationalcbc.com.
Welcome back, everyone. 14 and a half after the hour, and today in Behind the Headlines, we're taking a look at a new article from Paul Armentano that was published on Alternet, the 5 amazing new discoveries about the potential of marijuana that you won't hear in the corporate media. Paul Armentano, of course, is the deputy director of NORML and one of the best educated people on marijuana studies, science, and policy in the United States. And these are 5 studies that have just recently come out and in some cases, they just reiterate some of the stuff we've already known about cannabis. Here's the first one, and we've reported on this, that men who smoke pot possess a reduced risk of bladder cancer. This was just released in the Journal of Urology. LA Medical Center Department of Neurology assessed the association of cannabis use and tobacco smoking on the risk of bladder cancer. This was in 80,000 men aged 45 to 69 over an 11-year period. They found that men who smoked cigarettes had a 1.5 times greater chance of bladder cancer. Men who smoked only pot had a 45% reduced risk of bladder cancer. This is not the only study we've seen that's shown reduced risks of cancer. In 2009, there's a study at Brown University that reported long-term use of marijuana was associated with reduced risk of head and neck cancers. This was with over 1,000 subjects. The largest case-controlled study ever that investigated respiratory effects of marijuana, this from 2006, found no positive association between marijuana smoking and lung cancer. Dr. Donald Tashkin, the professor at David Geffen School of Medicine, told the Washington Post, "We hypothesized that there would be a positive association between marijuana use and lung cancer and that the association would be more positive with heavier use. What we found instead was no association at all and even a suggestion of some protective effect." Another study that's recently come out, long-term pot exposure is not damaging to lung health. This came out in December's Annals of the American Thoracic Society. This was an investigation at Emory University in Atlanta, found adults aged 18 to 59 did not have any significant decrease in their forced expiratory volume due to their cannabis use. That is how quickly and forcefully they can exhale air. Their lung strength seems to be just fine. A 2013 literature review in the same journal concluded, quote, "Habitual use of marijuana alone does not appear to lead to significant abnormalities in lung function," end quote. Third study to come out, alcohol, not pot, alters the brain. Scientists at the University of Colorado and University of Kentucky tried to replicate earlier findings that found brain changes associated with casual use of marijuana in young adults. They could not find these results with a larger, well-controlled cohort of subjects. They used MRI scans and investigated group differences in gray matter and found no statistically significant differences are found between daily users and non-users. When you carefully control for alcohol, gender, age, and other variables, there is no difference. Fourth study to come out recently, marijuana use does not lead to depression. According to longitudinal data that was published in the Journal of Affective Disorders, investigators concluded, quote, "Our results do not support a longitudinal association between cannabis use and an increased incidence of major depressive disorder. Rather, they indicate an inverse relationship between the two, which may be attributed to self-medication factors," end quote. Previous studies have underscored that as well. A 2013 study in the American Journal of Public Health reported a drop in suicide rates among states that had legalized marijuana compared to those that had not, specifically among men aged 20 to 39 years old. And finally, writing in Nature.com, an international team of German and Canadian researchers published a comparative risk assessment of the toxicity of tobacco, alcohol, and cannabis. And according to these researchers, they concluded that the risks of cannabis have been overestimated and the dangers of booze have been underestimated. They concluded, quote, "Our results point to risk management prioritization toward alcohol and tobacco rather than illicit drugs, and suggest a strict legal regulatory approach for cannabis rather than the current prohibition approach," end quote. And again, Paula Montano is the Deputy Director of NORML. We'll post this link to this article online in our chat room at 420radio.org. You can find it at alternet.org in their drugs section. Great article to forward to those doubters in your life that do not believe that marijuana legalization, or that believe, that marijuana legalization is going to lead to all sorts of problems in society. We are finding more and more the protective effects of the use of cannabis. These studies don't even go into these recent studies on Alzheimer's disease and concussion and the ability of cannabis to be a protective and neurogenerative substance for creating new brain cells when people are suffering from a stroke, an ischemic stroke, a concussion from Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and any sort of traumatic brain injury. These are some amazing results that aren't included in Paul's latest article, but also are some recent studies that have come out. Once again, showing that cannabis is an amazing medicine, not just to help people that are sick and disabled, but to help prevent people from becoming sick and disabled in the first place.
Hey, this is great, man.
All right, folks, it's 4:20 in the Mountain Time Zone. Happy 4:20 to our friends in Colorado and all throughout the great Rocky Mountains. Trying to make all of you legal as soon as we can. Coming up next, drug war data mining. We're going to take a look at how legalization has affected the perceptions and the use rates among the youth in Washington and Colorado. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
420 Radio. Tune in, turn on, get highly educated.
Georgia.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
I like it like that.
Well, I don't know what you came to do, but what we came to keep the funk alive.
That's right, baby. We're keeping the funk alive right here at Big Daddy Fink's Funky Roller Ring, your groovy home of soul, funk, and disco. So join me, Big Daddy, every Thursday night, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, at the Funky Roller Ring, where every night is Saturday night.
Get.Buzz. .Buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .Buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .Buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .Buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz. Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Welcome back, everyone. 23 after the hour. And in the Drug War Data Mines today, we're going to take a look at the children, because one of the big concerns about marijuana legalization amongst those who aren't naturally supporters of legalization is what effect it might have on the children. And now, with a year under our belt of legalized marijuana markets in Washington and Colorado, some preliminary data is coming out, and when you first hear it, and when some of our opponents first hear it, you might be very concerned about some of the things that are being said. This latest story I picked up from Como News, that's one of the news affiliates up in Seattle, Washington, that says the Seattle school district says pot to blame for most school discipline in Seattle. Between the start of the school year and January 7th, according to the story, marijuana made up 77% of all disciplinary actions taken against students. Okay, so 77% of all disciplinary actions. Is that an increase or a decrease? The school administrators seem to think so. Lisa Davidson, who does drug prevention efforts at Seattle Public Schools, say this year and last year is the first time that we have really seen the edible products come into our buildings. The confiscation of pot-infused caramels and drug-laced lemonade and so forth. Davidson said, quote, "What I'm hearing from principals is they are seeing more marijuana use during the school day. They're hearing more about it from students, and they're seeing different types of marijuana use," end quote. One of the parents who has 2 children enrolled in Seattle Public Schools says, quote, "Kids have started to think of marijuana as not being particularly dangerous," end quote. Also, we have some data coming out of Colorado, where in Colorado, high school drug incidences are down or flat since 2010. It's an interesting thing. 2009 is when the state's medical marijuana code passed in May of 2010, and that's where commercialization really took off in Colorado. And we did see a spike in high school drug incidents, that happened right after that acceptance of the medical marijuana market. But from about 2011 on, those high school drug incidents have been decreasing. And in the first year of commercialized legal markets in Colorado, it has remained steady. So it appears that after an initial surge in 2009, there's been a decline since then. But that does not play out for the middle school students. There was an initial surge in the middle school students in 2009 with the advent of medical marijuana dispensaries, and another surge for middle school students after the implementation of recreational marijuana shops in the state of Colorado. So this has some people concerned, but I think it's important that we get some context on understanding these numbers. Part of the context we need to know is from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And the government's survey on drug use in America does show that among people aged 12 to 17, your school-age kids, that there was an increase in both Colorado and Washington. Colorado's students increased by 6.59% their monthly use of marijuana, or how many of them are using marijuana. And in Washington state, there was an increase of 3.81%. Both of these landed Washington and Colorado in the top 10 among states that had an increase in youth marijuana use. But also in the top 10 are Florida and Utah. Florida had a greater youth increase at 6.97%, and Utah had a greater youth increase at 4.49% than did Washington. So Florida beat Colorado and Utah beat Washington, despite the fact both of those states are some of the most anti-marijuana states there are, and as far from legalization as you could possibly get. So trying to blame legalization for the rise in Washington and Colorado may be missing a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is that there is a rise overall in marijuana use in many states, regardless of what policies are in place. One way that we can judge how much marijuana consumption there is going to be among the youth, at least the way that our opponents have been looking at it, is through a look at their perception of great risk in marijuana smoking. How many students think it is very risky to use marijuana once a month? And when we look at that, both Washington and Colorado come in the bottom 10 of states where kids think marijuana use is very risky. But when we look at the bottom 10, they are 2 of the bottom 10, and the rest of the states that are in that bottom 10 are all medical marijuana states. Alaska, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Oregon, Rhode Island, California, Vermont, District of Columbia. And it would bear to reason that in a state where people, and even young people, know marijuana is being used for medical purposes, they would perceive it as being less risky. So this is not a surprising number for us to find out. The thing I think we need to take away from this data, and that we need to understand in moving forward with legalization, is to remember that the question here is not whether or not kids should be using marijuana. We don't want to see kids using marijuana, but we shouldn't be surprised when there's an increase in this after they've found out they've been lied to for decade upon decade. As we legalize, there may be an initial spike like we saw in Colorado, but I think as time goes on and marijuana becomes more mundane and mainstream, youth use will return to normal.
420 Radio, the world's voice of marijuana legalization. The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, treat law enforcement with respect and stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all of my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak with my attorney." Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at Growing plants indoors can be a rewarding hobby, but electricity bills can go through the roof. Then you have to cool down all those big hot lights. It can drive a grower insane. With Lush LED lighting, you can solve many of these issues and double your rewards. Matt and his scientists have developed the perfect light for flowering plants with far less cost and heat. And the results? Very effective. Check out lushledlighting.com right now and tell them Radical Russ sent you. The cannabis community is a diverse set of people from all walks of life, conservative and liberal, black and white, straight and gay, rich and poor, and everyone in between. Learn more about the people we are freeing from adult marijuana prohibition in our Cannabis Community Chat.
Welcome back, everyone. 31 after the hour. And today in our Cannabis Community Chat, we're going to be visiting with Joe Schrank. He's an addiction expert and founder of Loft 107, a sober living facility in Brooklyn, New York, and one of the co-founders of the website, thefix.com. Joe, welcome to the Russ Belville Show.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Glad to hear from you. And I'm really excited to talk to you. I've been following the website, thefix.com. And as someone who comes from a background, my dad was a drug addict who recovered and became a drug and alcohol counselor. I've seen both sides of the issue, and I'm really excited to get your perspective on the unfolding marijuana legalization in this country.
Well, it's a big issue. Where would you like to start?
Well, I think a lot of people in my audience have kind of a disdain or a distrust for the addiction recovery community, feeling that many of us have been, siphoned into drug courts and rehabs that many of us felt we didn't need. And we're used to hearing from people in rehab being very anti-legalization. You come off as someone who's pro-legalization, and why would that be the case for someone who supports addiction recovery?
Well, I don't know that addiction recovery has anything to do with the law, is the first thing. It's an individual decision based on, a bunch of different factors. For myself, I haven't been intoxicated in 18 years. It's for a very specific reason. I don't tolerate it well. But I don't think that there's any way to legislate people into making that decision, and nor do I think they should. I think, trying to, we don't have laws for diabetics. In the truest sense, I believe that using or not using, or using to impairment or not using to impairment if you're a recreational user, I think it's a health issue. And I don't think that it has any place under a jurisdiction of any kind of legal component. It's also incredibly racist. The incarceration rates are absurd. And the truth is, it's too much power for the government to have. If an individual is going to put something into their body, it's their decision. It's not a government decision.
As the states are moving forward with marijuana legalization, 4 of them now that are legalizing marijuana markets, they all have varying tax rates, and with those taxes, varying amounts that they're forwarding to drug prevention. How would you like to see the taxes distributed with respect to preventing and helping people with substance problems?
Well, I think that the whole thing needs to be redone. It's great that there's this opportunity as states legalize that you can have taxes that could help people in recovery or get into recovery, remove some of the barriers to accessibility, remove some of the ridiculous treatment centers that only proselytize AA. They're not coming at it from a perspective of science or any sort of empirical evidence. And so that's a real opportunity. But the other thing that isn't even looked at or addressed is the low taxation on alcohol. Alcohol taxes have always been low. You can get drunk on the cheap. And they don't pay for the damage that they cause to the community. So in my view, there should be an intoxicating substance tax that is designated for addiction and recovery services, and that should include alcohol. Because, just for example, and it's an extreme example, but it is true, Wyoming hasn't raised taxes on alcohol since 1935. And it's like 10 cents a gallon on beer or something. Basically you can get real drunk, real cheap in Wyoming. You can crash a car, you can beat up your wife, you can, do all the things that happen when people drink alcohol, and the community gets stuck with that bill. Not the distributor, not the manufacturer of beer. And so I think that this is an opportunity for America to have a conversation and a dialogue about intoxication and our relationship with it. Who makes the decision? You know, and that would be my hope.
As these states are developing these taxation policies, that is something that I've heard brought up as well. In my home state here in Oregon, they bring up how low the alcohol taxes are. And our opponents like to point out that the reason those alcohol taxes are so low is because alcohol is a huge industry with lots of lobbyists. And they use that
It is. It's a huge industry with lots of lobbyists. You know what? I hate to do this. Can you call me back in 2 minutes?
Sure.
You can? Okay.
Absolutely. We'll go to a commercial break and get you right back on the line.
All right. I've had some stuff happen.
Oh.
Okay, thanks, man.
Okay, 2 minutes. We'll be right back. We'll go to our anti-drug public service announcement of the day. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show. We'll connect back up with addiction expert Joe Schrank right after this short break. Make sure you check out Joe's work at thefix.com, the latest on addiction and substance abuse issues. Good to see people in the treatment community are getting on our side. We're back with more of Joe Schrank right after this.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
You can get 420 Radio on the go with our Shoutcast stream for all internet-enabled media players. Go to rad-r.us/420shout or just click the Shoutcast icon below the live radio feed at 420radio.org.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
Hey, Lindsay? I wish you didn't smoke weed. You're not the same when you smoke. And I miss my friend. I'll be outside.
This has been the anti-drug public service announcement of the day. To cure this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Russ Belville Show every weekday on 420radio.org.
Welcome back, everyone. 39 after the hour. We're rejoined by Joe Schrank from thefix.com. Thanks for coming back with us there, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that.
Oh, I understand. We're doing it live. Every now and then, my dog will start barking, so I know what it's like to have to adjust on the fly.
It was ridiculous. The guy, I was going to do this from the car, and he couldn't get my car out of the garage, and I was standing on the street, and then he got it. So anyway, here we are.
Oh, what a shame. Well, we were talking about intoxication tax, and that's an interesting subject to me. I've heard it phrased a couple of ways. One way from the people who say these alcohol taxes haven't been raised in so long, that substances ought to be taxed as a measure of how much harm they cause society so that they can pay their own bills. Our opponents often say, we bring in $1 of tax for every $10 of cost. But do you fear that raising the alcohol or cigarette tax might lead inadvertently to a resurgence in black market trafficking of those substances?
I don't think so. Look, I think that there's always going to be some kind of black market. There's always going to be people trying to game the system, but most people don't want to be thought of as criminals. Would you rather go to 7-Eleven and buy whatever it is that you buy, or would you rather set up some clandestine meeting, to do this, I think that most people would prefer to just pay the tax and be honest about it. So I don't think it's ever going to eliminate the criminality that goes along with it, but it will certainly reduce it. There's no question about that. It's already being seen. There's data on this already in Colorado and in Portugal, who's had this kind of policy for a decade. So we do know empirically and scientifically that is true. And so I don't see any point. I think that alcohol they've enjoyed a monopoly on legal intoxication for a very long time, and they don't want to let it go. And so a lot of the distilled spirits lobby and wine lobbies and beer and et cetera they have a vested interest in demonizing marijuana as a safer alternative if you are a person who wants to take the risk of intoxication. Intoxication comes with a risk. It does. It's less of a risk if it's marijuana than if it's alcohol.
This risk and these lobbies that you talk about, that's part of what gets used against us in legalization campaigns, is that the reason those taxes haven't gone up on alcohol is because the alcohol lobby is so powerful. So they fear if we have this big marijuana lobby, they also will resist high taxation. Is that a cause for concern for you?
No, I don't think it's a cause for concern. I think that's up to the states to legislate this and to do this in a way where it doesn't necessarily have to be high taxation, but it has to be appropriate taxation. And I agree. I mean, it would be difficult to say which form of intoxication is causing more damage, although we do know that alcohol is very damaging. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money in cleanup. It costs a lot of money in police calls and violence between partners and incarcerations and uninsured emergency room visits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in my view, it's the consumer who should pay for that. I don't want to pay for it. I really don't. I haven't had a drink in 18 years. I'm not going to, I don't want to clean up the mess. And so I think that it is up to states to roll this out and the legalization so that it's taxed appropriately so that it does cover, the consumer covers the cost of what they are using. And you can't do that without having a conversation about alcohol. You can't just say, okay, it's going to be marijuana. We're going to tax marijuana at a high rate. It needs to be revisited, our relationship as a country with alcohol.
We're speaking with Joe Schrank. He's a co-founder of thefix.com, and he's the founder of Loft 107. It's a sober living facility in Brooklyn. And Joe, I wanted to ask you with respect to that, there's kind of a new paradigm shift that's happening in the understanding of addiction. Johan Hari's got a book out on this that we're going to talk about soon. It talks about addiction not as the power of a chemical, but really a deficit of connection, of human connection. Have you heard of these new theories, and what do you think of them?
Well, I think that the theory is right on. I mean, I think that the one thing that we know that helps people, there are many, many roads to recovery and many paths to recovery. The traditional path and the path that people like has been AA. And AA is a great organization for certain people, myself being one of them. It's not a great organization for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. The truth is, if you played bridge with sober people 3 nights a week, you sent one group to do that, okay, we're going to hang out, nobody's going to get drunk, and we're going to play cards, and another group that went to AA, the rates would probably be about the same. And so a common problem and a common solution and a peer group are essential for people who are wanting to be in recovery. And so I think it is right on target, and that's something that we really need to look at. And a tax on alcohol and marijuana could help pay for peer-supported housing and all the things that we know that help people longer term stay in recovery.
There is also some controversy in the recovery world on the use of marijuana as an exit drug from harder addictions like heroin or alcohol. What's your take on maintenance therapy, using marijuana as something?
I'm all for maintenance. I'm all for it, 100%. Look, if I get a kid in my world chasing down heroin addicts and trying to get them into treatment, if one of them says, okay, I'm going to give it up, here's my rig, here's my dope, I'm going to smoke pot, I'm going to think, victory, good for you, man. I think that you have to replace something. If you're going to take away opiates, you have to replace that with something. And you can't replace that with scolding or judgment or shame or you didn't do a fourth step. That's not going to do it. So if people want to replace and maintain on marijuana, I'm all for it. And, I take a lot of heat for this because people say, that's just using one drug for another. And I say, yes, it is.
Yes.
Why is that a problem? Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah.
You're right.
We replace the one that could kill you with one that will not.
Right. We replace the one that could kill you with the one that will, it won't kill you. And at some point, maybe you don't want to use that drug anymore either. I don't know. But that's not where we are right now. If you're going to reduce your rate of, your risk of death to 0 from incredibly high, then I think that that's a big, huge victory. And I think that you're also, look, every kid I get into sober living, not every kid, a lot of the kids that I get into sober living, if they're IV users, they have Hep C, they have HIV, they have all kinds of things that they are unintended consequences that they now have to deal with in a compounded way. So not only do they have addiction, they also have Hep C or HIV or some other thing that's spread by using IV needles. Now, if these kids were passing around a joint, we'd all be much better off.
It's so refreshing to hear, this progressive thought from people leading in the addiction and recovery industries. We really appreciate your perspective on this. Before we let you go, Joe, other than thefix.com, do you have any contacts or websites you'd like to give out to people more interested in this subject?
Sure, you can find, absolutely. You can find me at reboundbrooklyn.com, which is the treatment program that we run, and also Facebook, just Joe Schrank. I'm very responsive. I'm happy to talk to anybody. If you have an AA audience, they're all pissed off at me. That's fine. I'm not a sensitive person anymore. I can take my lumps if you want to tell me, whatever. I'm happy to hear it. But look, I think that if 114 people died in the country of anything, the way they die of overdose, we'd be having a really important conversation about how to change that. And for some reason, we're not. And we would be looking at all options. One of the options being, in this case, one of the options being marijuana. And so, okay, why not? It is pure moral posturing, judgment, and shame that keeps people in this cycle, that keeps them in this loop of you didn't do this and you didn't do that and blah, 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 blah. And, and I think that, look, recovery is valid, in all forms of it. And so it doesn't make any sense to take that off the table.
Thank you.
And just a quick story, just a quick thing. I was listening to this doctor talk about comparing rates of damage between marijuana and alcohol. And, of course, the conclusion was the risk with alcohol is exponentially higher than the risk with marijuana. And the interviewer said, so what would you rather have your teenage children use? And the guy said, alcohol. I was like, what the fuck? What? Why? Well, it's more social. You can't smoke very. You're a fringe person, or you're sort of banished to a certain socio idea of people. And so we have a big, huge, long way to go. If a doctor would prefer his children to take the risk of alcohol because of the social stigma associated with marijuana.
Very well put. Joe Schrank from thefix.com. Thanks so much for joining us and offering your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Take care, man.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant. Welcome back, everyone. 50 after the hour. Today in the rant, I want to talk a little bit about the myth of the stoned driver. This is something that is used by our opponents who really have only two arguments left against marijuana legalization. That is, what about the children? And stoned mayhem on the freeways. And this latest study to come out from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is like a stake through the heart of this zombie lie. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration on Friday said, quote, the first large-scale crash risk study in the United States to include drugs other than alcohol found that once the data were adjusted for confounding variables, cannabis consumption was not associated with an increased probability of getting into an accident. Let us underscore that. Using cannabis does not lead to an increased risk of getting into an accident. We have heard Kevin Sabet and the drug warriors for years now telling us that using cannabis, even a little bit of cannabis, leads to double the risk of getting into a car crash. But this study, this included more than 3,000 drivers who got into crashes during a 20-month period in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and compared them to 6,000 controls driving in the same area in the same period who didn't get into accidents. Now, as usual, they found that alcohol was highly predictive of a crash risk. They found that blood alcohol content of 0.08 led to twice the crash risk. Not marijuana use. Being at the legal limit for alcohol, twice the crash risk. For drivers at 0.10, 6 times the crash risk. For drivers at 0.15, 12 times the crash risk. But when it came to drivers that tested positive for active THC, we're not talking about metabolites here, active THC, they were 25% more likely to be involved in crashes. Not twice the risk, just 25% more. But once the researchers took into account sex, age, and race, the risk ratio shrank from 25% more likely to 5% more likely, which is within the margin of error, no longer statistically significant. Also, they found that the primary reason we are seeing that increased risk among people who have cannabis in their system is because people with cannabis in their system have an increased chance of being young, male, and people that drink alcohol. That was what was leading to these previous studies showing that increased risk. They said further adjusting for alcohol consumption made the crash risk of cannabis consumers equal to that of drivers who tested negative for alcohol and all other drugs. No evidence that marijuana use increases crash risk. Now, there's no doubt in a lot of these studies that marijuana does lead to impairing effects. They've shown that. They've shown reaction time problems, space-time, lateral positioning, all these kind of problems that they find in simulations and studies. But that does not correlate to what's happening in the real world. It's kind of like that little fact nugget they throw out at you every now and then. They say, well, you know, marijuana's got 400 chemicals in it. It's got all these carcinogens in it. Marijuana is just chock full of carcinogens. But what they fail to point out is that cancer wards are not chock full of marijuana users. We talked about these studies earlier that show lower risk of cancer among people that use cannabis. So yes, cannabis smoke has carcinogens in it, but that does not mean that cannabis smoke is carcinogenic. Just like water has hydrogen and oxygen in it. Hydrogen is extremely flammable and explosive, but water will not light, no matter how much you try, unless, you know, it's some of that South Dakota fracking land water, but whatever. Chemistry matters. The makeup of these compounds matters. Just like the fact that marijuana may cause some temporary small amounts of impairment does not necessarily mean the people who are impaired therefore get into more crashes. Because like we see with THC being a substance that helps to reduce cancer, we see that marijuana use tends to reduce people's courage. It's the opposite of alcohol. People on alcohol are too messed up to drive, but believe they aren't. People on marijuana are okay to drive, but think they aren't. It's kind of the opposite. People will refuse to drive when they feel they are too high. We have seen this in the simulator studies and the test track studies, where they get people high, in a repeated, take a bowl every 20 minutes or so. And after like the third bowl, a lot of these test subjects say, I really, in the real world, I wouldn't get behind the wheel right now. I wouldn't do this right now. You rarely, if ever, hear that from people that are drinking alcohol, because alcohol lowers one's judgment and one's perception of one's own impairment. Marijuana does not lower one's judgment, nor does it lower one's perception of impairment. In fact, it exacerbates it. There's a bit of a paranoia that makes you think you're more impaired than you really are. But to me, folks, the proof is in the pudding on this one. It's not as if legalization has introduced marijuana and cars. Marijuana has existed in popular culture for 4 decades now. 5 decades, if you want to. Let's go 5 decades, right? We can go back to the mid 60s. People have been using marijuana. Lots of young people have been using marijuana. And yet nobody has associated that with any sort of fear of a stoned driver in the real world. You can kind of tell a little bit about a culture by the stereotypes and jokes that it comes up with. Usually there's like some kernel of truth in there that led to that stereotype or to that joke. And of course, the standard joke or stereotype of marijuana drivers is the drunk driver runs through the stop sign. The stoned driver sits there and waits for it to turn green. Now, it's a silly joke, but it does reiterate kind of it wouldn't be funny if there wasn't a kernel of truth to it. People wouldn't find that funny. Drunk driving is not thought of as funny anymore. Now, I grew up in a time in the 70s, my dad got 4 or 5 DUIs, rolled a couple of cars, never wrecked into anyone. It was all by himself, usually falling asleep at the wheel. But that was just considered something that happened. It was just, something that we as a society put up with. That, we have a right to drink and people can get drunk and every now and then they drive their cars home and wreck. That was just every day. That was no big deal. But our culture changed and began to realize the extreme danger from intoxicated drivers. Now, it's not as if during the whole era of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which really took off in the 1980s, it wasn't as if people weren't also aware of marijuana and didn't realize lots of people were using it. By 1979, we experienced the peak of American marijuana use in monthly consumption terms. 60% of high school seniors had tried marijuana. And yet, we didn't also see a Mothers Against Stoned Driving taking off. That wasn't considered to be a big risk, a big problem. The alcohol risk was so clear and convincing that Mothers Against Drunk Driving took off like a shot and managed to lobby successfully to get 0.08 as the blood alcohol standard, lobbied successfully to get age 21 as the universal drinking age in the United States. Why was there not also a severe drive against stoned driving at that time? Because they didn't perceive it to be a problem. Because it's not a problem. And now the data are in. The United States government has proclaimed it. And you got to imagine that the drug warriors who've relied for so long on stoned mayhem on the freeways are spinning desperately to try to find a way to make this sound scary to people. Well, folks, that's all the time we got for Hour 1. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. We'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about that shifting paradigm and addiction that I had mentioned, how Johan Hari and a lot of progressive researchers are getting rid of that stupid disease model of addiction, looking at it a different way. Plus, I will deliver my presentation on how not to piss off your cannabis clientele. For everyone here at 420 Radio, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,